Justin Gaethje compared what he did to Ilia Topuria to what he did to Tony Ferguson. Not the physical damage, though that was significant in both cases. The thing he broke was the perception. Before Gaethje finished Ferguson, Tony Ferguson was the man you could not stop. The man who recovered from everything, who came at you no matter what you threw, whose identity inside the cage was built on being unsolvable. Gaethje did not break Tony Ferguson's confidence. What he did was change how every subsequent opponent viewed Ferguson. He showed people that Ferguson could be walked down, that the aura was not unassailable, that once you got through him physically the mystique disappeared. And according to Gaethje, that perception shift is permanent. Ferguson never recovered it. And now Gaethje is looking at Topuria and saying the same thing is true. That comparison is one of the most significant pieces of analysis to come out of any post-fight interview, and it deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as trash talk. The specific thing that makes fighters like Ferguson and Topuria so dominant is not just technique. It is the psychological weight they carry into the cage, the way opponents second-guess themselves, enter the fight already partially defeated by the reputation, give half a step of distance they would not give someone else because the finish feels imminent. That psychological weight is not durable once it has been publicly dismantled. Topuria's opponents now know something they did not know before June 14th. They know that he can be hurt. They know that his face can be smashed. They know that 4 rounds of sustained damage can break him in a way that his training camp did not prepare him for. Whether he rebuilds the aura or whether, like Ferguson, his record of dominance becomes historical rather than present tense is now the defining question of his career. Gaethje's post-fight analysis of the specific tactical mistake Topuria made is the most technically useful thing said about the fight from either camp. He focused on the second-round sequence, the moment when Topuria had him hurt, had him on the floor, had him genuinely vulnerable. Topuria chose submissions. Trevor Wittman had already identified this publicly, but Gaethje's framing adds a dimension Wittman's did not. He said Topuria's approach in the second round was a 2-minute sprint at full power, every punch at full intensity. You cannot train for that. You can train 30 or 40-second sprints. 2 full minutes of everything is something the body is not prepared to sustain and recover from. Gaethje survived it because he has been to these places before, because his body and mind have been through wars that give him a map for surviving them. Topuria, who had never been in a fight this difficult, burned through a gas tank trying to finish a man who has never been finished by punches and then could not refill it when the rounds continued. The observation about Topuria's unusual stance during the fight is something that has not gotten enough analytical attention. Gaethje noted that Topuria was fighting with his hands very high and his right hand tucked unusually close, and that every time Gaethje threw, Topuria would hinge backward at the waist with his head past his heels. He said Topuria has never done this before. That specific defensive behavior, the backward hinge, the head going past the base, is a tell. It is what a fighter does when they are worried about power they have not experienced before in competition. It is protective instinct overriding trained defensive mechanics. And the result of the head going past the heels is that it becomes harder to generate offensive power from that position, harder to counter effectively, and harder to maintain the kind of forward pressure that Topuria's entire offensive system is built around. Gaethje was watching this happen in real time and adjusting accordingly. The man who seemed to be surviving was actually reading and adapting. Conor McGregor's observation about Topuria at the White House, delivered at the Joe Rogan face-off with Max Holloway, was simultaneously generous and cutting. He said he likes Topuria, that the kid can make inroads, and that he saw this coming because Topuria was walking forward with his hands down at the opening bell, and that is how you get walloped. He acknowledged Topuria is not a fully complete fighter. And then he said the thing that stings the most, not because it is mean but because it is accurate. Topuria was going to get his night before the big win against Oliveira and he did not, and now he has had it. The implication is that every great champion eventually gets that night. McGregor's was the Nate Diaz fight. Gaethje's was the Max Holloway knockout at UFC 300. Now Topuria has had his. What they do next is the measure of who they actually are. Gaethje's self-analysis of his own psychology heading into the fight is one of the most honest things any fighter has said about their internal competitive experience in recent memory. He said he told himself he was going to lose. He said he told himself he was going to get embarrassed. Not as a negative visualization but as a tool. The deliberate removal of expectation creates a state where the primal competitive instinct takes over without the interference of outcome-based thinking. He described the fight against Ferguson as a comparable experience, knowing he could win but not centering his mental preparation around winning. And he described the Max Holloway fight where he lost as the opposite. He could hear the crowd, he had thoughts, he was not in flight or fight mode because he did not feel the kind of fear that focuses a fighter completely. He said he could not have beaten Holloway that night regardless of what else happened because his mentality was wrong. The eye poke controversy, the kicks, those are not the explanation. The explanation is that his internal state was not the state of a fighter who was going to die if he lost, and the only state where Gaethje performs at his absolute ceiling is the one where everything is on the line and the only option is to keep going. The truck story is the most unexpected subplot of the entire post-fight period, and it reveals something genuinely funny about the competitive relationship between Gaethje and Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan bet $5.7 million on Gaethje. Well, his friend bet it, in the story that has been told and contested, and said he would buy Gaethje a truck as a celebration. Gaethje refuses to take the truck because they never shook hands. Dana White mentioned the Ram sponsorship. Tsarukyan is researching prices. Gaethje said absolutely no way, I would never take a truck from someone who never shook my hand. And then in the same breath acknowledged that Tsarukyan is the guy, that he is probably the next opponent, that if anyone in the division makes sense it is him. So the man who is refusing the truck from Gaethje is also the man who is going to fight Gaethje for the belt, which means the truck negotiation and the title fight negotiation are happening simultaneously in the background of the most significant lightweight championship reign in years. Gaethje's position on the Topuria rematch is absolute no. He said Topuria quit on the stool, that he stopped him twice, once in the second round when Topuria gave up the ground position, and once with a corner stoppage, and that a man who quit does not get a rematch. He said Topuria can try, but he will not get one. That is not posturing. That is a man who believes his win was comprehensive and who does not see a competitive reason to give the former champion an immediate path back to the belt. Whether the UFC agrees with that assessment depends on whether the commercial logic of the rematch outweighs Gaethje's preference, and the commercial logic of Topuria versus Gaethje 2 in Spain or anywhere else in front of the right crowd is significant enough that the UFC's preference and Gaethje's preference may diverge. Whitman's reflection on his own coaching failures and lessons is the most intellectually honest piece of the post-fight material from the Gaethje camp. He said he did not catch the fact that Gaethje did not respect Holloway in their fight, the one Gaethje lost. Gaethje told him afterward, and Whitman said he should have seen it and he did not. He applied that lesson going into the Topuria fight explicitly. They built the entire game plan around preparing for someone who would be better than expected, told Gaethje to expect the war, told him to expect adversity. The camp was structured around psychological preparation for the worst case rather than tactical preparation for the best case. And when the worst case arrived, the second round when Topuria hurt him, Gaethje was not surprised, not psychologically overwhelmed, just doing what he had trained to do in exactly that situation. The Topuria analysis from multiple voices consistently points to the same thing: overconfidence built on inexperience with adversity. The celebration dinner the night before. The casket promo video. The public guarantee of a first-round knockout. The specific psychological trap Gaethje had identified weeks before the fight, that backing himself into the corner of a specific dramatic outcome meant that every round that passed without that outcome was a compounding psychological cost. By the time round 4 arrived, Topuria was fighting a fight that had already told him something was wrong, with injuries he had sustained because he refused to accept that information, against a man who had been through things like this before and knew how to be there. The experience gap was not in technique. It was in having already learned what it feels like when everything goes wrong and choosing to keep going anyway. Here is what the post-fight period has established. Justin Gaethje is the most decorated UFC lightweight in history by multiple credible accounts. He has been interim champion, BMF champion, undisputed champion, and has been in more title fights than anyone in the division. He has a fibula bone edema he has been managing since Christmas that nobody knew about until after the fight. He refuses a truck from a man who never shook his hand. And he believes that what he did to Topuria permanently changes how every future opponent will view the former champion. Topuria is out until 2027 with double orbital fractures, already planning a rematch in Spain, and carrying the weight of having lost his first fight in the most public possible way at the most public possible moment. Whether he recovers the perception, whether he becomes the kind of champion again who walks into a cage and makes opponents second-guess themselves before the first bell, is the question that his 2027 return will begin to answer.